I propose, and I think we need a new Grace Commission, but one on steroids. And it is not a commission on waste in government, but a commission on wasteful government. The focus needs to be not just on bad aspects of what government is doing, but the bad aspects of government itself, wasteful government. Government programs, offices, policies, agencies, and yes, departments of the federal government are inherently and completely, many of them, wasteful. But what we need to do before we go to the American people and say, let's cut out the Department of Education because there's no legitimate basis in the Constitution, even impliedly, for such a department, we need to do something that Republicans and Democrats in recent years have not wanted to do, and that is to go to the American people and educate them as to these, the tremendous waste, not just in terms of the money involved, but the power involved in many of these government programs. So what we are proposing is, I say, a new sort of a Grace Commission on steroids to categorize every single federal program and expenditure and agency, office, and department according to three very important criteria. And this would then provide the blueprint for identifying in probably the second half of a Barr administration exactly what steps would be proposed legislatively to the Congress to enact these both dramatic cuts and eventual elimination of many government agencies, offices, departments, and programs. The first criteria would be, is there a basis, explicit or reasonably implied in the Constitution for that federal agency or program? Secondly, even if there is it a program or a function that is best performed by the federal government as opposed to the preferable level of government to perform an essential function, state or local government? Only then, if you meet those two criteria, would you then go to the third, which would justify a continuation of that program, agency, office, or department, and that is, do the benefits outweigh the cost? That is a legitimate cost-benefit analysis, something we tried to enact in the Congress back in the early years of the Republican majority after 1995, but never had the votes, not because we didn't have a majority, the Republican Party at the time, but because the Republican Party was not unified behind such a common sense, fiscally and constitutionally sound principle. So that is a very, very important part, and we'll be putting out details on that, but a very important part, and really is at the heart of one of the primary focuses of our campaign to really get America to focus on the tremendous cost, not just in terms of the fact that every dollar that the government takes away, every one of those $3.1 trillion this next year that it will be taken away, represents a loss of buying power, but get Americans to realize that that represents a loss of freedom. Much more than simply the buying power, it represents loss of freedom to the federal government. And there are many ways that Americans can be reached on these issues, talking about the cost to small business, talking about the cost to the environment and its offshoots, medicine, for example, as Ian was referring to, talking about education. While we had a tremendously important and very positive decision at the Court of Appeals level in California just a few days ago that discovered, unlike the lower courts in California, that parents do indeed have a right to educate their own children, there still needs to be a very concerted focus on what is education, where is the responsibility for education, and should not those nearly $70 billion that the federal government spends each year directly on its Department of Education be better in the pockets of the American taxpayers and the parents so they can decide how to educate their children? However, and whatever specific perspective and programs we use to get the American people to focus on this fundamentally, direly important principle and program, we ought to use, and it's something that really should not be bound by artificial party labels, but it is something that I believe, and the Libertarian Party believes, is absolutely essential to move forward on in order to not just salvage what little is left of individual liberty and the right to privacy in America, but to begin dramatically and substantively rolling back that tide of government power and freeing up, bringing the light of day once again to shine on individual liberty, not government power. John, that talks a little bit about our campaign and some of the key issues, and I'd leave it up to you if we have some time for some Q&A or some comments.
We've got time for some questions, and I'd like to start off taking questions from any media that might be in the room, and if we answer those questions, we'll open it up to the general audience. Henry?
Why did you decide to leave the Republican Party and Libertarians?
The question is, why did I decide to leave the Republican Party? The Republican Party left me. And it's very similar to an answer that a gentleman that I used to work for when I was U.S. Attorney, he appointed me into that post, Ronald Reagan. He answered the very same question, other side of the coin, many years ago when he became a Republican. He said the Democrat Party left him. He didn't leave it. A party that shows no fiscal restraint, no sense of fiscal restraint or fiscal conservatism any longer, and a party that does not simply show no respect for individual liberty, but disdain for individual liberty and disdain for the very framework of our country's governance, that is separation of powers and limited powers and rule of law as opposed to rule of men. A party that no longer shows any respect for those fundamental principles is a party that I certainly, as a former Republican, could not support. And I think a lot of Americans are feeling that way, and I think this also will play into the election. I think there are a lot of disaffected Republican voters out there, sort of libertarian-leaning Republicans. They're certainly not going to vote for Mr. McCain, any Republican or any senator whose signature piece of legislation is one of the most anti-freedom laws in modern times, the McCain-Feingold, can really not lay claim to being conservative, and a lot of Republicans recognize that. Some certainly will push that aside, push principle aside, and vote for party, but an awful lot of them will not, and we intend to bring the message of liberty and respect for those fundamental principles of governance to them, and I think it'll be very receptive. Thank you.
Tyler?
If you siphon off votes from the Republican Party and you help get elected, you might help elect Barack Obama. Does that bother you?
Standing up for principles should never be something that any American shies away from or feels guilty about. It would be a sad state of affairs if we ever reached the point in this country where somebody stands up and stands for principle, does the right thing for the right reason, but is criticized because that gets in the way of practical politics. In point of fact, also, going back to what I mentioned a moment ago, it's not an accurate scenario. The fact of the matter is that individuals who would go to the polling booth on November 4th and vote for a big government Republican, that is Senator McCain, it would be very difficult for us to pull them away, even if we were trying to vote for a small government libertarian. The voters sort of on that side of the ideological spectrum or political spectrum that we are targeting, intend to reach, and I think will reach, are not voters that McCain has or is likely to have, but your sort of libertarian, true conservative Republican voters that would not vote for McCain at any rate. We intend to reach out to them, and I think we'll get an awful lot of them.
Are there any other questions from media? Ben Krause.
Well, I is related to that. I'm afraid that what's going to happen is Republicans are going to have to, or Democrats are going to have to get in charge, and they may well get in charge, and then people will be so mad, then that gives the Libertarian Party an opportunity. There's a little bit of the chicken and the egg. I'm a Republican. I want to vote Libertarian, but I'd hate to see the rocket in. But maybe that's what's going to happen, and then it's so bad, and then the Libertarian Party is a true alternative.
There are a lot of scenarios out there. It's going to be a very, if not confused, a very unusual election year. I mean, it already is. Very few people, I certainly, when I was asked a year ago, or a year and a half ago, or 10 months ago, who I thought the likely nominees would be on both the Republican and Democrat side, guessed wrong. I mean, it is a very unusual election cycle already, and will be even more so by the time November 4th rolls around.